Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this slightly later planned meeting of the Executive of Waverley Borough Council. First of all, can I apologise to any of the members of the public that might be watching this that we are a little later than we had planned. Waverley Borough Council does have a tendency, when asked serious questions, to talk about those things for a little while, and tonight was no difference. So welcome to this special meeting of the Executive, which has been convened to consider one substantive item of business only. My name is Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of the Council and Chair of this meeting of the Executive. Meeting is being held in the Council Chamber at the Berries in Godalming and is being webcast live. The agenda was published on Monday the 10th of March and a supplementary agenda pack was subsequently published on Friday the 14th of March 2025. First of all, Chris, could I have apologies for absence, please?
Just to confirm, Leader, we have no apologies for absence.
Thank you very much indeed. And declarations, members? So I think, do we need to have a similar declaration as earlier, or is it just taken as read?
Through you, Leader, just to confirm that the dispensation remains, so all members of the Executive are able to fully participate and vote.
And just as I was given in the declarations I gave in the previous meeting as a county councillor, I of course attended and voted at a similar session of the county council this morning. I'm sure there's at least one other who has that joy in the room. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. Can I make the same declaration?
Thank you very much indeed. Right, in which case then moving on to the one and only item on the agenda, item 3, local government reorganisation. In terms of the report, what you have here, just to be clear, of the resolution that Council passed moments ago, the Executive resolved to require the Leader of the Council to submit Parts A and B1 proposals of the district and boroughs for 3 unitary authorities of the joint interim local government reorganisation plan to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government by the 21st of March. We could very easily repeat a lot of what has been said in the debate, but I do want to make sure that in this meeting we have at least covered some of the main points. Tonight we have considered, before coming to this meeting, reports of the district and boroughs and also the county council. It is certainly my opinion, and clearly the majority opinion of Waverley Borough Council, that a 3 unitary option reflects a more local aspect of local government within this county. We also have serious issues with the financial assumptions and justifications in the Surrey County Council report versus the equivalents in the report provided by the district and boroughs. There are also significant concerns, though, outside of this process in regards to debt and how debt is managed and the way that it has impacted this process. There has also been concerns expressed about the general financial sustainability of local government, which hasn't been addressed by this process at all, and generally concerns about the speed and pace that local government reorganisation is having to be undertaken at. And that goes, I think, even for those of us who actually support unitaries as a concept. Before I hand over to registered speakers, of which I have one, I did also want to just take this opportunity to very publicly thank the officers and staff of Waverley and Guildford Borough Council for all of the work that they have done. Some of them are in this room, some of them are not. I also do want to specifically thank some of the other councils for the work that they've done, notably Reigate and Banstead, but certainly several others. I have had to spend a great deal of time with my fellow leaders of councils across this county over the last 9 weeks or so, a little bit before Christmas as well. It has meant that other than talking about local government reorganisation, in some cases like today, from 10 o'clock in the morning right the way through till 10 o'clock at night, it also means I know where Tandridge is. And it means I know where Spelthorne is. And it also means that actually, for the first time, I think in a very long time, all the leaders of the councils of Surrey actually start to understand some of the issues in patches other than their own. And that process has been, I think, completely separate to this process, has been eye-opening, frankly. And actually, going back to one of the points made in the debate, by spending time with the leaders of borough councils in the north of this county, one of the members in the previous debate here talked about the character of the boroughs and districts being different. And when you speak to the leaders of, Epsom and Ewell and Spelthorne, they talk about actually, if they were doing this process with a blank sheet of paper, they'd be wanting to be part of London because in practice, they're London facing, their issues are more urban based. There is a difference in character. I think it was you, Gemma, that said character. And I think that point, when you spend time with those other leaders, you get that feeling immediately. And it is actually reinforced my belief that 3 unitaries is the right approach. Because it doesn't make sense to cause an unnatural tension between these areas when you don't have to, and particularly when the financial and non-financial benefits align quite so, I think, quite so properly in the 3 unitary model. At that point, I'm going to open the floor first of all to the single registered speaker outside of the executive, which is Councillor Jerry Hyman, and then I'll bring it back to the floor. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, sorry to keep you an extra 4 minutes above what you would have to, but I did actually, I wanted to apologise, and I wanted to explain that I voted against curtailing the debate earlier on because I thought there was more that needed to be said, and I did want to speak, and I was thinking about putting it in an amendment, but what I wanted to do was actually to strengthen the case that we're making. I want us to do things properly and do our best for residents, and at the moment I think that the 3 unitary option is by far the best in terms of representing residents, because this should be about doing our very best for the residents, not for us, and certainly not what's best for Surrey, which seems to be what their submission was all about, doing as much as they can for themselves. Unfortunately, as far as residents are concerned, I'm sure they would, a lot of them I know, agree with me in saying they cannot trust the council's information. Either of them, because we just don't know. It's so disparate, the information that we've got, the financial information particularly. We don't have enough information to make a proper decision. There is no evidence to back up the Surrey claims. I trust our officer's information far more, but I don't know that I can trust it implicitly, obviously, because the evidence isn't there. There is no information on childcare costs, the biggest single issue here, and and how we can improve things on that. But I know there are serious issues with Surrey's social care departments. We know, as you've said, there's none of these options work without sorting out the debt. So where are we really? Because the government, we're up in arms. So I think that we should add, we can't trust the process. The Surrey County Council's Chief Executive Officer, I know, wants to go for 1 unitary, but obviously the government won't let him do that, fortunately. But that, to me, tells us it's going to end up as 2. Surrey will do what Surrey will do. And so I want us to strengthen our case for 3, to make it as difficult as possible for the Minister to do that. I don't know, I think we've only just recently received Surrey's stuff, that information. We haven't had any time for scrutiny, no time whatsoever, and I think we should be critiquing Surrey's proposal. I think we should add an extra letter to what we've got. It might be too late, but you guys might decide now that we should give authority to the officers to add a critique of the Surrey County Council proposal along the lines of what's been pointed out this evening. I don't know whether it's the right thing to do or not in terms of, because the council haven't actually agreed it, but that would be to do our best for residents to push for the 3rd. For the 3 unitary option. We should complain about the process, the government's process. Actually, we've been far too nice about them because there's been no engagement with residents whatsoever. No, we know that any of these options that we've got at the moment is going to be more distant, more remote, more inaccessible democracy. There's going to be less councillors, less time for councillors to help, and no time for councillors to do proper scrutiny with the new systems. And quite honestly, I think, to some extent, it will be a full-time job for councillors in future. They'll expect full-time pay, so there's no guarantee of savings, and it's going to possibly cost more. It's a recipe, perhaps, for disaster for self-serving little Hitlers, the only people who are going to be able to stand for council. And it's going to be very harmful for their home family, whatever life. It'll be full-time politicians instead of normal folk that we've got at the moment. I know you've expressed that yourself. So, very worried about this, but I think please do, I'll wrap it up there. Please do consider yourselves now that we should add a critique of Surrey County Council if it's not an inappropriate thing to do, because I think we have to do our best to stand up for what we've got. And could you please just tell me, whenabouts did we get Surrey County Council's information? Because surely they could have given us that information sooner. So, it's like they've put fantasy finance stuck in front of us, and it's too late for us to say anything or do anything about it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Jerry. Can I just also ask in future, just moderating language slightly in terms of things like little Hitlers? I think it's just moderate language. I mean, there's possibility to cause offence in some quarters. But broadly, though, I do agree with almost all the comments that you actually made. There are a number of issues that I have had throughout this process, and the main one was that in about week 5, the county had started to make conclusions at the meetings. And for example, one of those was that there would be a problem if the demand for, say, adult social care or children's services was geographically distributed around one part of the county, and that a broken up county might have the revenue coming in the wrong area to support where the demand was. And I think logically you could kind of see that might be a possibility. It's not an unfair thing to say, but the county are in a position where they know where the money is coming from and they know where the demand is because it's their services. And they made that sort of statement and then did nothing to back it up. And several weeks had gone by the time that had happened. Now, the districts and boroughs proposals had effectively evolved over the course of several weeks. Versions of it had gone up in front of everybody, including the county. People had had a chance to look at it, to comment, to make changes, to scrutinise it really as best we could. And bearing in mind that also included the 151 officers of the district and boroughs and things like that. And we saw nothing from the county for weeks. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that some of the numbers that I read in the final submission from the county were things that we had asked for weeks ago. And actually in reading the public document, that was the first time I had seen them, which I think is a pretty ridiculous thing to say. I should also note that there were 2 data repositories set up during this process. There was one for the districts and boroughs that was hosted by Guildford, and effectively it was a shove all your data to support your assumptions. It wasn't more complicated than that. The county had an equivalent. County one was empty for a very long time. And when it started to not be empty, it wasn't very detailed or very complete with what it was full of. And this was the case pretty much right up to about week 7, when people started kind of losing their patience a little bit with it. And it's where really we then split from the proposal that we were going to try and put in one joint bid together to the county being where they are now and the districts and boroughs where they are now. As a county councillor myself, I've been trying to moderate my experience of the county and the attitude to how they operate at all levels. And I've been trying to not let that colour the debate that we've been having as Surrey leaders. And of course, there are, how many council leaders are also county councillors? The leader of Spelthorne, the leader of Mole Valley, the leader of Guildford are also all county councillors. So we've all got experience of what the county can be like. And we've tried to not let that colour everybody else in the room's debate, but they are seeing it now. So I do think that there will be some kind of joint letter or statement from the district and borough leaders. I'm not going to propose an amendment to our own recommendations to outline the deficiencies of the county bid. There will be a statement from the D&B leaders, which I think will cover that, and it will be more powerful coming from more than just me, in my opinion. So that is something that we will do. In terms of making this a more robust bid going forward, I just want to thank the officers for the work that they have been able to do in such short space of time. I wouldn't have wanted to have been county members and officers actually having read our bid the second that they came out, frankly. But that is 8 weeks' work that was done in a bit of a rush, bluntly, on everybody's case. We now have a staggering, 6 weeks to try and refine this, which is in itself pretty ridiculous. So I think it's a case of we're going to do the best we can. I was at a really constructive meeting of the district and borough leaders at 3 o'clock today, where there was a discussion about how this is properly project managed for the next phase and how it's managed in a really structured approach over the next 6 weeks to get that into a better position for when we get to May the 9th. We'll also obviously be getting some feedback, I suspect, from MHCLG on things, not least of all debt. Right, I will open it up to everybody else. Kika.
Thanks, Ida. Well, I'm not going to mention Runnymede. I noticed nobody else has done, but that's another one that's got problems, isn't it? But going on from there, can you explain, and I don't think people understand clearly, what the mayoral strategic authority actually does? How does that work? And if you've got 3 unitaries, do you have one in each department? I mean, nobody knows any about, can you explain something to do with that, please? The other thing I was going to say, just to echo what I think Gemma was talking about, was when you have an area like Staines, which sits on the rim of London, you have a denser population, don't you? And therefore, the needs of that population, I would think, in terms of social welfare, would be far greater. And therefore, I would imagine that the focus and the energy and the time will be transported there quicker and more profoundly than it might be in an area where it's not so needed, or at least it's not so dense in terms of the population. But yeah, the more important thing, I think, is just trying to understand the mayoral strategic authority. Thanks.
More resources, more issues, and I would say also different issues. The nature of the issues is different, and I'll use an example that I think is, it's not quite relevant because it's police, but it's easier, I think, just to see it straight away. If you've got a police authority that has a very large urban area and there's lots of rural areas around it, you're probably going to put most of your resource in that urban area because that's, you've got limited resource and that's where most of your issues would be. And as a result, you'll ignore the rural. And I suspect many of those things already occur in the county and would occur in a different way in a unitary that has to manage an urban border in its north and an incredibly rural south with some bits in between that reflect both natures, frankly. So I do think there'll be some issues. I haven't specifically mentioned Runnymede because although they are in the top 3 of debt to income ratio, and I think ultimately they do have some challenges, Runnymede are in the position where they don't believe there are currently any issues, and I, at the moment, don't wish to fall out with Runnymede. That is their business. What I will say is, though, that for the last 3 or 4 weeks where we've been explicitly talking about Woking, I've been saying we need to look at other people's debt that is also in danger of crystallising soon. And lo and behold, on Monday, Spelthorne did. And up until about a week ago, we were all sitting there. I say we were all sitting there. The mantra was, well, a 151 has signed off, Spelthorne is fine, so that's not our business to question it. And I have to say that attitude annoyed me a lot, and I did challenge it several times in the meetings. And as you've seen, Spelthorne's has crystallised. Pedro, I imagine you want to comment on this?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So just there's 2 particular points to draw out. So Runnymede is a slightly different situation to some of the others because it had a best value intervention. And it was undergoing that best value intervention and was collaborating with it. That was not the case for Spelthorne. So its best value intervention is what's just concluded, and that report is what's just been published and recommends the kind of next steps. The Runnymede intervention is a sort of slower burn one, as it were. So they're working with Treasury at the moment to kind of deal with their current situation. In terms of what a mayoral strategic authority is supposed to do, that is set out in the white paper. And broadly speaking, the way to think about it is a bit like the Mayor of London or a bit like the Mayor of Manchester, in the sense that they are intended to be the place that considers strategic issues across the entire strategic authority. So strategic infrastructure, there'll be some suggested kind of devolution of finances related to skills and potentially transport, with some devolution of rail services potentially under their purview. But all of that is up for negotiation, and there is a process to resolve that kind of what type of devolution we're interested in, but it comes after the LGR process and requires LGR in order to unlock it. Thank you.
But would that mean that each unitary will have one?
So it sits above that. And if you think about the geography at the moment, because of other people, other areas like Hampshire and Kent and Sussex and so on, putting in their own bids for their territories to have a mayor, you can imagine Surrey at the moment, what we now call the territory of Surrey, would have a mayor, a strategic mayor, and underneath that, instead of there being a county council and 11 districts and boroughs, there will be 3 unitary authorities, or indeed 2 unitary authorities, depending on what the government pick. By the way, the government might throw out all of this. And actually, I think there's a lot of reason why they might, particularly if none of the views are articulated well, in their opinion, or indeed the debt issue completely torpedoes the whole thing. So, I mean, let's not rule out the third option, that the government say no to everything. I think that's quite a realistic prospect, frankly. Right, I've got Tony, and then I saw a hand over here, Liz and Mark. Yeah, and then Steve.
Thank you, Paul. I chose not to speak against the amendment because I knew I'd be, well, I thought I would be, summing up and seconding our motion. And in doing so, I'd like to actually make a slightly different point. I agree a great deal with what Councillor Hyman said about the debt and about the timing, and indeed that was also been touched on by a lot of other people. However, I must admit, I do disagree with one of his assumptions, which is why I think it's so important that this council supported the idea of 3 unitaries. And that the reason why is, I'm afraid that because I am deeply cynical, I think we heard tonight from the opposition, in particular Councillor Atkins, a feeling that the arguments for 2 unitaries are in fact an argument for 1, a single unitary. If you were to take what Councillor Atkins and Councillor Coburn in particular were saying and apply those logically to their conclusion, then you wouldn't have 2 unitaries, you'd have 1, a single unitary. And I think that is frankly the worst of all worlds. It's the 4th option. It was, to take Paul's 3 option analogy, it's the 4th option, and I think it's the worst of the 4. Why do I think it's the worst of the 4? Because, and here I do go back and support Councillor Hyman, it's the one that acts against the interests of our residents. It's the one that gives them the least voice, the least access to councillors, the least feeling of local involvement, the least feeling of engagement. There's another key word which local government reform was meant to bring to them. Indeed, instead it's likely to take it away from them. So that is why I particularly favour the idea of 3 unitaries. And I would also remind everyone, in case you think that my cynicism is ill-judged, that we already, or we didn't, sorry, our residents have already had an opportunity to debate and have a say on this issue taken away from them when Surrey County Council said you can't have an election in May, where they could have had an opportunity to listen to the very things that have been discussed in this council chamber and had the opportunity to vote according to the people, the parties whose viewpoints matched their own. That was taken away from them. And as a result, I fear that the further away we go from that, down to 2, I think someone used the phrase, a Trojan horse to get to 1. No, not for me. 3 unitaries, it must be 3 unitaries if that is the only thing on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm just going to flag everybody that the time is about just after 9:45. I think we're still obliged to take votes of carrying on after 10. So I'm going to see if we can carry this on for the next 10 minutes before we wrap up. I think officers and members here have had an incredibly long day. So I've got Liz, Mark and Steve, and I'll come back for one more round and then we'll try and end there.
Thank you, Leader. And yes, it has been a long day, but I would like to take this opportunity again to thank officers for all their hard work, and also you, Leader, for all of your input into this and the work that you have put into it. I firmly believe that a 3 unitary model best suits our residents. I'm convinced that this aligns most closely with the very essence of devolution. Devolution is not just about finances, it's about empowering those who know their communities best to make decisions. This leads to better outcomes and a more efficient use of resources. By adopting this model, we can serve our residents to the very best of our abilities. I too would have liked to spend more time planning this, but we are forced to work at breakneck speed because Surrey put itself forward for local government reorganisation and that request was accepted. The tight timeline imposed by the government is the reason why, regrettably, there's been no time for consultation with our residents. The matter of debt is crucial. It must be addressed by the government as the current level of debt makes a future unitary authority unviable. While the recommended number of residents per unitary is ideally around 500,000, it's clear that the government is flexible on this point. And we also need to future-proof these unitaries, factoring in the unprecedented housing growth we are facing. Our housing numbers under this new government have more than doubled to 1,481 new dwellings per annum, which effectively requires the construction of new towns like Farnham and Godalming within the borough over the next 20 years. Other districts and boroughs in Surrey face similar increases. With just 2 unitaries, local representatives will soon be serving much higher numbers of residents. With only 2 councillors representing each division, this would exponentially increase their workload, covering extremely large rural areas in some cases. I know from my own experience as both a borough and a county councillor just how overwhelming my casework can be. Currently, I have the support of 5 additional borough councillors across my division. With this increased workload, far from attracting the broad range of councillors from diverse backgrounds we were hoping to in this council, we would likely see only those with independent income or excess time taking on these roles, or those forced to sacrifice more. And there aren't that many of people can afford that. The pressure of these heavier duties has actually already been raised with me by councillors, and they are extremely concerned about their ability to actually be local representatives. I know we all want to deliver more for our residents. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shape the future, and we should bring our experience to bear on this critical decision. Having lived in a rural part of the county for over 33 years, I understand firsthand how my community feels disconnected and overlooked by the large county council. My residents often tell me how they feel left behind, struggling with crumbling rural roads, inadequate public infrastructure, public transport, inadequate infrastructure, a lack of family support services, no youth services, and limited access to children and adult services. A 3-unitary model would keep us closer to the communities we serve. It would better reflect the diversity of housing and economic market areas across the county, ensuring that local democracy is genuinely supported. Smaller unitaries would help preserve the uniqueness and character of our rural communities, ensuring that local heritage, culture and governance remain central in our decision-making processes. A 3-unitary model respects local democracy, maintaining a balance between strategic oversight and community-based decision-making, while reflecting Surrey's diverse communities. It would ensure that the voices of all areas are heard, especially in strategic planning, economic development, skills and transport. These needs vary considerably between more urban London-facing areas in North Surrey and the more rural communities in the south, like Waverley. With fewer representatives, there is a significant risk that the needs of these rural areas would be overlooked. In conclusion, I strongly believe that a 3-unitary model will offer the best governance solution for Surrey. It will also provide more voices to feed into the mayoral strategic authority, which Pedro has already outlined, the types of strategic areas that will cover. I think if you just have, hopefully, theoretically, the leaders of the unitaries, the 3 unitaries, will sit on the strategic authority. And I think that will provide a much better and broader range of voices for the mayor than limiting it to just 2 strategic authority, two unitaries. So I do hope that the government considers seriously 3 unitary authorities and doesn't just look at the bottom line, which was being suggested by our opposition here. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Liz. Right, I've got 2 more speakers registered. I want to do one final call for any other speakers other than the 2 I've got. So I'm going to be taking Mark and then Steve, and then I'm going to wrap up. Okay, so Mark.
Thank you, Paul. Listen, I just sort of associate myself and agree with everything, with one small exception. Everything that everybody's said, Liz, Tony, and as I say, one small exception, Jerry. And I'm particularly attracted to the idea of writing a rebuttal to the county's Part B. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to repeat some of the remarks I made in the council earlier on. In our Part B, the districts and boroughs have focused on representation and best value and used evidence from the 11 examples of LGR that have taken place across England since 2009, together with the independent expert analysis from PwC. The D&B's modelling has also benefited from the expertise of all 11 D&B Section 151s, including some with direct relevant experience of precisely this kind of reorganisation. This compares starkly with the county's analysis in their Part B, which seems to prioritise money and power over value, and which seems to be built on less than convincing assumptions to the extent that Surrey even identifies what those are. Surrey's financial analysis doesn't adequately explain even its so-called base case scenario, let alone its stretch case, whatever that may be, or why the midpoint between them is a reasonable basis to go forward. Its analysis is equally short on detail for the alarming disaggregation costs and assumed reorganisation benefits. And on top of that, Surrey banks tens of millions of pounds worth of additional mysterious so-called annual transformation benefits, even in its base case scenario. That matters because each of the 11 D&Bs has already identified and banked in their own medium-term financial plans what savings they reasonably expect to balance their budgets for their local services. Surrey doesn't explain how or why it thinks it knows better about them. And this is about both double counting and making unrealistic or overly optimistic assumptions. And the Spelthorne Best Value report is only the latest to caution against these sorts of things. But here we know that Surrey does have form. With cost pressures, for example, in the last 2 years alone, the county's underestimated the demand for adult care packages to the tune of £148 million through to 2930. And when it comes to overestimating its abilities to make savings, just since 2021, Surrey's had to reverse over 350 million of the efficiencies it had planned through to 2930, which turned out to be undeliverable. And what about transformation costs? While the text in their document says they've been rolled up with the reorganisation costs, they don't seem to appear anywhere in that cost analysis tabulated later in their document. The county's non-financial analysis also seems to be just as problematic. Take just for example the scoring system. It's contrived to mark its own subjective analysis of the unitary options, which isn't explained either in terms of the base scores or their so-called weighting. It does speak volumes that Surrey's Part B models 4 possible 2 unitary arrangements and a single unitary, even though that's been ruled out. But the county has reduced all of the possible 3 unitary options to just 1 for consideration, and it's neglected the existing disaggregation arrangements already in place for its 4 children's social care quadrants and its 5 social care areas. So whether we progress to a 2 or 3 unitary will be for the government to decide, but it's the analysis that we're considering now that'll inform not only that decision, but others yet to come, like the overwhelming debt question and the fair funding for our services going forward for years to come. And that's why robust and evidence-based forecasting matters now. I'm satisfied that a 3 unitary model is the more representative model and offers best value for our residents. And I really hope that whatever the government next decides, it'll base its decision in the evidence, which I believe in this case is better reflected in the district and boroughs Part B submission. Can I just thank you, Leader? Consultation and engagement has, at the government's insistence, been an important part of this process, and I can't think of anyone who's actually done more to tick that box than you over the last few weeks. And I'd really like to thank the officers who've been given a monumental task to get to where we are today, and I'm afraid is probably just the tip of the iceberg looking forward, and I think they deserve our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And to confirm, Steve, this will mark 12 hours for me and Liz talking about LGR. So you're the last speaker tonight.
And I'll be very brief. Essentially, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think Mark's analysis of the options and the conclusion that 3 unitary is by far the better option is something which I don't think is in dispute in this executive. But I just really wanted to say that, my support for this proposal, I would express it more in sorrow than in anger, because, I do remember the 1972 Local Government Act, and it did replace one very imperfect system by a slightly less imperfect system of local government. And it's a real opportunity that we've actually got to reshape local government. And there are so many opportunities, I think, that are being missed here. So, the other issues which were raised in the debate, important issues of how we actually vote for councillors, the need for electoral reform that provides more representative kind of a set of councillors in different councils, introducing a fair and more truly progressive system of council taxation, and genuinely empowering truly local councils that that are the closest to the communities in terms of town councils and parish councils, are big issues which I think we do need to be addressing. And I, those issues are not going to go away. And neither is the issue of public consultation in terms of how we go forward and how we reshape this new form of local government going forward. And as I say, as I think Mark pointed out, you, Paul, as leader of this council, have done so much to communicate what has been going on at this, as things progressed at breakneck speed. And I think that was absolutely commendable. But I think perhaps as we now enter this next phase, we desperately do need to be doing that public consultation, which is so important when we are facing this once in a generation opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. And while we've been sitting here, I've heard from the leader of Epsom and Ewell that Epsom and Ewell have supported 3 emphatically. Leader of Surrey Heath has also just told me that they've again supported 3 emphatically, although he has thanked me for the 20 uses of the word skewed that came up in his own council meeting over in Camberley. So I'm glad I'm having a wonderful county-wide impact on local politics. That's definitely what I was aiming for. At that point, we're going to move the recommendation to the screen. So press, public and anybody else, and indeed all of us in the room, get a final confirmation of what we're doing. At which point, are the recommendations proposed by council agreed by the executive? Can I have all those in favour, please show? And as there is no need to exclude press or public, I can blissfully close this meeting at 22:03. Thank you all.